I became interested to learn how a sailboat works. Since I already owned a canoe, I decided to build a sailing rig for it. I did some research and found that there has been a long tradition of sailing canoes. I constructed a sailing rig and it's been fun. I used only materials that are readily available from hardware stores and lumber yards. In this video, I will share some of the things I have learned and some modifications that I have made. I will also explain the basic nomenclature in case you are starting out like me with no prior sailing knowledge. The three main components of a canoe sailing rig are the sail, the leadboards, and the rudder. Let's start with the sail. There are many types of sails that could be used on a canoe. The type of sail on this canoe is called a standing lug. It has been suggested that the appropriate size of the sail for a canoe is equal to the length of the canoe multiplied by the width. In my case, the 18-foot length multiplied by the 3-foot width equals 54 square feet, which is the size of this sail. This sail has been cut from a poly tarp with the perimeter edges finished by applying double-sided carpet tape and then folding it over a small rope. All of the poles that support the sail are collectively called spars. The vertical spar that supports the sail is called the mast. The horizontal spar along the bottom of the sail is called the boom. The boom has the fork on the end to attach to the mast. The spar along the top of the sail extends on both sides of the mast, so it's called a yard. Spars can be round or rectangular in cross-section. Since I cut all of these spars from 2x4s, they have rectangular cross-sections. The cross-section of the boom and yard are 1 inch wide by 1.5 inches deep. The cross-section of the mast is 1.5 inches square at both the top and the bottom, tapering to 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches at the top of the canoe. I used a router to round all the edges of the spars and all of the other wooden components. The finish in all the wooden components is 3 coats of spar varnish. The mast is installed by inserting it down through a mast thwart on the top of the canoe and then to a mast step on the bottom of the canoe. The mast thwart is secured to the gunnels with either small bolts or screws. This old aluminum canoe is manufactured with a mounting plate for the mast step, which is unusual. Typically, the mast step is mounted with screws on a wooden canoe or epoxied on most other canoes. If you want to install a mast thwart and mast step without adding any holes or any glue, a little more ingenuity is required. For an example, I have used some old boards to construct this mock-up to fit the configuration of this particular canoe. The mast step is supported by diagonal struts in 3 directions to provide rigidity. Cleats are installed under the mast thwart at an angle, which will slide under the gunnels and wedge into place. The tongue extending from the thwart rests on top of the breastplate. A cleat under the tongue is grooved to fit tightly in the lip underneath the breastplate. It is dropped into the canoe, slid forward to wedge, and then just one bolt holds everything in place. It requires more effort to build, but it can be installed and removed very quickly and easily. The line that controls the angle of the sail is called the sheet. The sheet may be as simple as a rope tied to the boom. My sheet is a little more advanced than that. It is rigged to also provide some downward pull on the sail. The line which is tied to the yard and used to haul up the sail is called the halyard. To raise the sail, first the halyard is threaded through a hole in the top of the mast. The small loops of rope which connect the yard and boom to the mast are called parrels, which may have threaded beads to reduce friction. The sail is laid out on the canoe with the parrels over the hole in the mast thwart. Then the mast is set down through the mast thwart and into the mast steps. The sail is raised by pulling on the halyard and then the halyard is cleated to a belay pin. The sail may be lowered quickly by pulling out the belay pin. In order for a boat to sail across the wind or into the wind, it must have a surface extending down into the water to prevent the wind from pushing the boat sideways. Leeboards are typically mounted on sailing canoes for that purpose. The leeboards are mounted on a leeboard thwart. The leeboard thwart is mounted on the canoe with slotted cleats that slide under the gunnels and fasten with the bolt and wing nut. Since the cleats are slotted, the leeboard thwart can accommodate varying canoe widths. The leeboards are attached with a wing nut on some awl thread that is epoxied into the end of the leeboard thwart. These leeboards are about 9 inches wide and they extend down 30 inches from the bolt hole. The downwind side of any object is called the lee side, and only the leeboard on the lee side is needed. So the leeboard on the upwind side may be rotated out of the water. When sailing downwind, neither leeboard is needed, so both leeboards may be rotated out of the water. If you release the rudder, the sailing canoe should turn into the wind and stop. This condition is called weather helm. The canoe will sail best with a slight weather helm, which is affected by the location of the leeboards. To find the appropriate leeboard location, estimate the spot which is the middle of the sail and is called the center of effort. It is denoted by the green rag in this photo. Start with the leeboards mounted directly below that point. Sail perpendicular to the wind and then release the rudder. If the canoe turns downwind, move the leeboards forward and try again. To reduce the amount of weather helm, move the leeboards backward. Sailing canoes commonly have rudders, but a rudder is not required because a paddle can be used for steering. This works well when there are 2 people in the canoe so that one can steer while the other operates the sheet and the leeboards. But when sailing solo, it becomes difficult to manage the sheet and the leeboards while steering with the paddle. A rudder makes steering easier and more relaxed. But if you do decide to steer with the paddle while sailing solo, I would suggest getting a cam cleat for holding the sheet. Cam cleats are common items on sailboats, but usually not available in hardware stores. With a cam cleat, the sheet can be cleated and released quickly. A rudder is usually attached to a canoe with a pair of swivels that come in 2 pieces called the gudgeon and pintle. 2 gudgeons are mounted permanently on the canoe by drilling holes through the stern and then sealing the holes from the inside when the gudgeons are mounted. I didn't want gudgeons permanently mounted on my stern, so I constructed a rudder mount instead. The rudder mount fits tightly on the stern and it is tied to hooks on the breastplate using trucker hitches. It seems to work well and I've never had any problem with it. I used eye screws for swivels on the rudder. I use small wooden keepers to close the gap in the eye screws so that the rudder can't float loose. The rudder is about 10 inches square. The rudder is built to swivel up and down. It can be raised by a rope when the canoe is in shallow water along the shore. Since the rudder will float up, a rope is also needed to swivel the rudder down and hold it there. I just wrap these ropes around the top cleat to hold them in place. Steering lines can be run from the rudder to any part of the canoe. If you would like to learn more about constructing a canoe sailing rig, I suggest a book written by Todd Bradshaw titled Canoe Rig.